Hi, thanks very much. I just want to do a quick intro to my esteemed company, a set of excellent curators and critics. Moisir, who you were introduced to before, and here Guy Brett, who, as many of you may be aware, is very important to all of us here in England as, if I may say this, the godfather of our understanding of Latin American art.
Not religious.
Yeah, well, a secular version of that. And Pablo León de la Barra, who is equally very important to us here in this country for his writing and curating with artists from Latin America, and also has an excellent blog. If you don't know it, then I recommend you subscribe to it or follow it, which is called the Center for the Aesthetic Revolution, where you can see his projects and also a lot of the exhibitions that he follows and documents. It's a brilliant resource. So without further ado, I began the approach to the panel by the term peripatetic practices. I was thinking, because of the company I'm in, that there was a scope to kind of approach it in terms of curatorial practice, some of the issues involved in curatorial practice, just as a starting point. But also from that, obviously that involves collaboration with artists and particular types of artists for whom that term might be relevant. And picking up slightly also on some of the issues that were discussed in the earlier panel, which I think there's some room to continue. One of the ways in which you might understand exhibition making to involve ideas of movement and itinerancy is the way it works by creating this bridge between a place of production and a place of exhibition and reception. And obviously, when you're dealing with artists from a particular place which is perceived to be very different, then there's a kind of bridging that's involved in that. So I'm trying to create some questions that kind of cut across all three members of the panel and me too, but that we'll be able to reference particular projects that they've been involved in. And one example that's relevant to this, if I can start with Guy. Guy Brett curated an exhibition in 1990 called Transcontinental, which similarly had a set of 9 artists, actually 9 artists representing Latin America, a very similar, exactly the same as Tanya's exhibition, in fact. And it also took place very soon after our first, in this country, our first and our only survey exhibition of Latin America. It's interesting that we've only done it once here as well, and it was in some way a reaction to that.
A kind of expansion of it.
Expansion, sorry, reaction is not a very positive term. But one of the things I was interested in terms of how Guy approached the exhibition is that the question that a lot of people have been asking about what is it with Latin America, why are you English people interested in Latin America, and that in a way thinking about that had to be part of the process of preparing for the exhibition. And one of the things that Guy mentions in the introduction to the exhibition is that he is, or was, deliberately choosing a group of artists who belong to I think the term used was an international urban network of artists. So rather than choosing artists who would need a context to be brought, who would need preparation, which is the word you use, this was a kind of distinct group of artists who were kind of already international. I suppose I'd just ask you to say a little bit more than that, about that, and also whether that still is a perspective that you have.
Well, just to recap a bit as to how this exhibition took place. Dawn Addis had organised this big exhibition called Art in Latin America, the Modern Period, which covered from the independence movements in the 19th century up until today. And she asked me to organize one room in this exhibition, which I called a radical leap, and which focused on Venezuelan, Argentinian, Brazilian artists who were highly experimental, and Oiticica and so on. Yeah, okay. And I welcome the invitation, but it gave me the feeling that I should also try to organize something which dealt with contemporary, very contemporary work. Because Dawn's allusion to contemporary work was fairly restricted because it was a very long span survey exhibition. And I also wanted to represent, give the artists quite a lot of space to use. So I originally proposed this as an idea to Nick Serotto, who was the director of the Whitechapel Gallery at that time. And although he was fairly knowledgeable about Latin American art, he hadn't at that point appreciated its uniqueness, I don't think. I think he would probably agree with that. Of course, he changed his mind completely in subsequent years. And so in the end, the show opened in the Icon Gallery in Birmingham and the Corner House in Manchester simultaneously. Because I wanted to have large-scale works, the show had to be divided between two places. So what I did was to have a main work by the artist in one of the venues, and they would then be represented also by a smaller work in the other venue. So all the artists were visible in each venue.
Do you want to, I know you wanted, Guy wanted to speak also about some specific works, and maybe from the context of transcontinental, to talk about the work of Eugenio Ditborn, and perhaps how that work seemed particularly appropriate to what you were doing in terms of transporting an artist who lives and works in Chile to London. So this might be a cue to discuss that work.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to introduce a sort of element of surprise. I'm interested to see if it does come as a surprise to you. But
which one is yours?
Oh. Should I go to the controls?
Is yours drawing?
Which one is it?
I think it's
yes,
drawing.
I think it's on there.
Yeah.
The first one. You may be surprised to learn that this drawing is by Gilda Morelos. And Gilda has been drawing all the years since he was making the work for which he's better known. And it seemed to me extraordinary that he would also produce drawings like these at the same time as he was producing his known works. And I thought this is a fact that has to be considered, has to be thought about. We're so accustomed to artists working in a particular way, and we've become identified with them completely. And these drawings seem to show another side of Gilda, or a necessary element in the practice which produced his better-known works. And there is a catalogue. There was an exhibition of his drawings, and there is a very good catalogue in which there's an interview between Federico Moraes and Gilda. And I just would like to read out a short paragraph from their interview. Frederico Moraes, he asks, what is drawing to you? One would need to know something of the etymology of the word, Gilda replies. Perhaps drawing has something to do with shadow, and with the shadowy side of the drawer. Through shadow, it reveals the light side of things. Or perhaps it has something to do with the subject's inner life, with the quicker and more intimate meaning of things. Drawing is a quick process. Only the mind is quicker than drawing. Among the many languages and procedures, drawing is the most immediate, the one that has the smallest amount of time between the moment of revelation and its formalization. I think it's a very, very beautiful definition of drawing, sort of description. And if we could just skip, just quickly go over the next slide and on to the third. Another of Gilda's drawings. And a detail of an airmail painting by Eugenio Ditborn. When there was, we've been talking about travel and peripateticness, I thought it would be interesting to introduce a work in which it's the work that travels, and it's the work's travel, which is a question of the poetics of the work. And this applies very much, obviously, to Ditborn's airmail paintings and the way in which they enabled him to communicate from Chile at a time when there was not an infrastructure for art in the sense that we understand it. Enabled him to communicate with the world at large, which he did by keeping a continuous process of sending out and returning his airmail paintings, which were then unfolded at their place of destination and became very large paintings. And also in Ditborn's case, the way in which drawing for him was a question of finding, not of making drawings, but of finding drawings, which he would do in little scraps of paper thrown away in telephone kiosks and other sources like this, children's drawings, and identikit drawings from police records, and drawings by psychiatric patients, all combined and sort of overlaid, and in fact overlaid in this particular work. So I think.
Thank you, Guy. I wonder whether the element of surprise that involved in showing that kind of work by Isildo Morelos might connect to what Catherine was saying earlier about how we have a certain taste, we have a certain developed taste for Latin American art. At the moment, that taste is conceptual, and maybe it'll be something else next year. And I wonder how possible you think it is to be able to, when you're doing this process of kind of introducing Latin American art in this country, which you know we've all been involved in, whether wanting to kind of play with those expectations is part of what you want to try and do. And I think this is a question that I could ask you to respond to, but equally both Moacir and Pablo in terms of is there a desire to kind of subvert what the prominent taste is for under this rubric of Latin American art? Do you want to go first, or shall I?
No.
Thank you. I'd like to take the idea of taste and like to talk a little bit about my experience of working in Recife, which is not in one of the two very central cities in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo, where most of the artists and institutions, big institutions, are. Because I'm a latecomer in this medium, as I said before. But when I started in late 90s, there was a sense of discomfort about the way that the production, the artistic production, not only visual arts, but music and cinema and so on, that were produced in the northeast of Brazil or in other regions of Brazil that are not in the southeast, where Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo are, were viewed by viewed from São Paulo and from abroad. Because Recife, for example, that's my birthplace, the place I still live, was seen as the place of tradition, the real Brazil. It's not only seen like that from outside, but this image was cultivated from inside as well. Whereas São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro were the contemporary Brazil, the international Brazil. It's much more linked to New York and London and Paris than to Brasilia or Recife or Porto Alegre or Amazonia. But at the time, several artists from Recife were felt completely disconnected from that taste, from that vision of where they're doing. And through their work, they subverted that idea, especially starting from music, from the so-called movimento mangue, but rapidly disseminating these ideas through visual arts, fashion, cinema, and theater, etc. And from that moment on, the theoretical people, the curators, the commentators, the writers, had to try to understand it all again. Because the artists pointed out the inadequateness of the idea that the conventional idea of what they were doing and what they were really doing at that moment. So I think that it's important to point out that the idea of taste is one that exists, is created by a series of actors, of players in the art world, but the artists themselves are always subverting that idea of taste. I think that from time to time, we see something that doesn't fit in, like when guys saw this piece by Cildo, it simply doesn't fit in. They received the idea about what Cildo was supposed to do. Yeah. So you have to always think again about what the...
And you have to, as a writer, as a curator, as a researcher, you have to be kind of also looking for these. Yeah,
actually it became a sort of obsession to me. At the beginning, we did a large project called Nordestes, in plural, Nordestes, trying to discuss the many ideas of Northeast region in Brazil that could be, and presented it in São Paulo. Yeah. The show was presented in São Paulo. It was 1990. And then again, some years ago, I curated the Panorama de Arte Brasileira, called as a biennial show organized by the Museum of Modern Art in São Paulo. And it was named Contradictory, because I'm trying to understand what's the idea of Brazil. What does it mean to be Brazilian from the arts? Because in the 90s, I think things changed a lot. Because only in the 90s, the young artists felt they had a legacy in Brazilian art. They were part of a history of Brazilian art. And that was mainly because there was this huge international reception of the key artists, Brazilian artists abroad, like Oiticica, Lígia Clark, Tunga, Cildo Meirelles, etc. And of course, Guy participated a lot, contributed a lot to this international reception, especially in the case of Oiticica. But the fact that in the 90s, from the early 90s, that reception was also inside Brazil, happening also inside Brazil. And the young artists felt they belonged to that tradition. But at the same time, that same generation was the generation that was quickly inserted in the international scene, to residencies, to biennials, etc. So this generation was simultaneously immersed in a national tradition and also absolutely integrated with the international scene. Yeah. And they had to somehow negotiate with this ambiguous sense of belonging. Yeah. So this exhibition was an attempt at dealing with this new situation. Yeah. So that was maybe my two experience in trying to understand this relationship between what you think the artists do and what they are really trying to do.
Excellent. Yeah, Pablo, if you...
No, I don't have much to say about this, but no, I was thinking of the case of Paulo Bruschi, for example, who is from Recife, who in the 70s was trying to break this isolation, who could relate to Ditborn that guy was showing, and he was also doing this kind of traveling art, postal art. It's a way of breaking the Recifian isolation, and kind of opening to a wider dialogue.
Yeah. I think that's true. I think something I'm thinking about also, connecting the two, is I think something maybe important about England is that it's worth noting that the place that took on transcontinental was not London, and Recife similarly, and wanting to kind of retrieve somehow the value of a word that's seen as being very negative, of the kind of parochial, as a British version of marginality, and how a lot of the reception of Latin American art here took place a lot of it took place in London. I mean, obviously Signals really crystallized a connection with Latin America, but I think that Latin America ought to also kind of force us to rethink our own sense of geography concerning England. That's just a kind of aside that links kind of Recife, what more might link Recife and Manchester, or Recife and Nottingham. Yeah.
It's quite interesting that in the Transcontinental exhibition, Juan Davila, a Chilean artist, decided that he would, instead of being the object of the European gaze, so to speak, he would reverse this relationship, and he would assume that he could concentrate on, and he could focus on British culture. Mm-hmm. Which he did in a very complex way. His painting came in a roll from Australia, and he painted it. But he came over and he extended the painting onto the walls and the doors and the whole room. Staged the Latin American struggle, if you like, within the context of Wuthering Heights, the novel Wuthering Heights. I won't go into any more detail because it's quite involved, but it did make references to current British art. He made a reference to Gilbert and George, for example, and so forth in his painting, which I think I actually would like to see that painting again, because I think it's become a kind of historical document now as well as a painting, which he did specially for the show. No, I have no idea where it is. I'm sure it's somewhere.
And Jimmy Durham performed a similar operation in the context of the Biennale as well, where he was kind of directly addressing Brazil.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think this is something that...
very good room.
Yeah. I wanted to be able to give a proper platform for Pablo to talk about certain projects. And given the theme of this panel, one thing that might be revealed through talking about projects you've done is the extent to which this connection between Latin America and itinerancy and movement and travel is something very specific, almost kind of inherent to the condition of it being a discovered land. Maybe this could be a pretext for you to talk about your most recent, I think, exhibition project.
If you don't mind, I'll pass the images from there and then talk from there.
Okay. So this year, Pablo curated a show called Incidents of Mirror Travel in Yucatan and Elsewhere at the Museo Tamayo in Mexico. And I think there were some links to be discussed between this and some of the ideas that are involved in the Peripatetic School.
Maybe exit. Yeah. This one. Hello, no. So, here's the peripatetic folder. Here's the desdibujando folder. We choose the images, we make them big. Here we are. So basically, I'm going to try to be short because we don't have much time and we have to go through two basic ideas. But one was my text that was commissioned for the exhibition, and I titled my text Desdibujando América, and it was kind of an homage and reference to Raimond and Gilda's traveling work Dibujando América, which Raimond and Gilda talked a little bit about it. And what I was interested in finding a kind of way of describing some traveling practices that happen in the American continent. Notice again that I'm talking about America. I'm saying American continent. I'm not saying Latin America. So I think it's an important part of the text, and also of maybe answers Raimond's question about Latin America, and also his project or their project, Raimond and Gilda's, was called Dibujando America, not Dibujando Latin America. So I think it's an important term, and it's a big misunderstanding that happens in England, where people always say South America. But in Mexico, for example, it's north of the equator, so is it south or north? It's south of the United States. So in terms of dealing with the confusion generated by the usage of language. So basically in the text, I tried to find a prehistory for some of the traveling practices. And so I talk a little bit about Paul Bowles and his distinction he does between the traveler and the tourist. Che Guevara's diaries, who have influenced motorcycle diaries, who in a way have influenced many different artists, and then moving up to Juan Downey's project of Video Transamerica. And just to be like fast for those that don't know the project, it was shown recently at the Tate. Tate acquired it through the Latin American Committee, and it's a fantastic work. But what Downey was doing, he was filming different scenes in the continent, and every time he was traveling to a new place, he was showing what he had already filmed. So in a way, it was a kind of a moving exhibition which tried to break the isolation between the different countries of the America. And then I moved to present three different examples that I was interested in. One was Pablo Helguera's Pan-American School of Unrest, in which Pablo Helguera, a Mexican that lives in New York, traveled from Alaska all the way down to Tierra del Fuego with the project of the school. And he would set up the school, and he would try to, like reach out for the local artist communities of the different places he visited throughout the continent. And in a way trying to create if not a consensus, to raise questions about what this Pan-American identity meant. And then Raimond and Gilda's project, this is a drawing this is by Raimond, I think, no? And then this is a drawing that a drawer made of Raimond and Gilda. So again, the way in which Raimond and Gilda were kind of learning from, let's say, the vernacular drawing, or the way people draw, the way non-artists use drawing. So that was one of the points that I mentioned. And then the third example was Capacete, which is a residency program in Rio de Janeiro, run by Helmut Batista, but who also has a project called Capacete Road. And what happens in Capacete Road is that Capacete leaves Rio de Janeiro and travels to different cities, always Helmut and one of the invited artists. And the idea is that that the traveling goes from one point to another. So the first trip was from Rio de Janeiro to Chile with the artist Chaves, and it was called ironically the Motorcycle Diary. So they went in the car to Chile, to Galeria Metropolitana, and then they showed the drawings that Chaves did during the trip in Galeria Metropolitana in Santiago, Chile, which is a small metal shack in a kind of a working class neighborhood in Santiago. And then in different occasions, not connected temporarily to each other, the trip has continued. So it went to Valparaíso with Carla Saccarnini, then it went up to Lima or Ecuador, continued to Colombia. Every time with different artists, sometimes different vehicles also, so it was not always the same vehicle that was doing the trip. So what I wanted to say is that actually what these artistic practices were doing, one was they were drawing, but they were not drawing with the pencil and with paper. They were drawing lines through their travels. No? They were drawing through doing this. The actual drawing was the traveling, but more than drawing, what they were doing was desdibujando. So it was not drawing America, but actually they were de-drawing America, which I think could be the right translation. Yeah. And the idea of de-drawing America, I borrowed, it comes from three main sources. One is Edmundo Gorman, who was a Mexican-Irish thinker from the 40s, 50s, and who was also brother of one of Gorman's architects, for those who are interested in it. And what Edmundo, he wrote a text called La Invención de América, so the invention of America. And he traces the history of how America was really, the name of America, and the content was a European invention. So it's kind of one of the first responses to this idea. And the other two ideas that come from the idea of desdibujando are the idea of deschooling, as brought by Ivan Illich, who was an Austrian philosopher, who worked first in New York with Puerto Ricans, then moved to Puerto Rico, worked in Puerto Rico, and then worked in Mexico in Cuernavaca. And he proposed the idea of deschooling society, so a kind of creating horizontal forms of education, which would be, I guess, institutionalization of education. And then the third idea would be Walter Vignolo's idea of decolonizing, and Walter is an Argentinian thinker that works in Duke University in Indiana, and he has been pushing this idea of decolonizing, or kind of rethinking again the whole idea of the American continent from the inside, and not from the outside. So those are the ideas that guided the text. And here we finish with
Pablo, I might just flag something there, because I think it's making quite an important point that we haven't said that explicitly, that we concentrate a lot about the fact that Latin America is this, Anglo invention, and what does it mean, and so on, and maybe that what we ought to be putting more focus on is the fact that that artists in different ways have been involved in the process of in a kind of similar to the point of view of decolonialization, of trying to reappropriate and reform and take possession of what Latin America is. And this is something that your essay kind of articulates very well. And I mean, I from looking at Latin America as a English person, which is kind of inexplicable, I have come to the conclusion that it exists not because it was invented from a colonial point of view, but because it was reinvented, and it was reinvented with a lot of force in the 60s and 70s, as a politicized move, as a way of kind of establishing solidarity with successes and with failures. But I think that we can put too much emphasis or too much kind of anxiety about it being invented as in English or from a kind of European point of view. And I think what's interesting now is that there was a moment in the 70s where artists were moving, and they were drawing Latin America by traveling through it, like Juan Downey and others. And what is interesting now, I think, is that it's happening again, and that there are artists, thinkers, curators within Latin America who are very deliberately being Latin American via forming collaborations, by learning about the different histories in the region. And I mean, I suppose it's more of a question, like what is the difference between that movement now and that movement in the 70s? I don't know if you have an answer to it, what you think is motivating it now.
I mean, the 70s was a political response, basically, of the Latin American, I mean, I don't know if to call it left, but against the construction of America as a United States. No? So it was that idea of creating a Latin America identity as a response to the colonization and capitalization done by the United States in the American continent. No? So.
And who do you think the enemy is now?
The enemy is within.
As we're kind of veering towards the polemics and at the end of the session, it would probably be a good moment to invite some reactions or questions from everybody here, the floor.
Hi. It's a very simple question. Do you think that I think in the case of Brazilian artists, that they think of themselves within the Latin American context, that their references are Latin American, that it's still something that, I don't know, I tend to think that artists nowadays have references from all over. So what I wonder is how long, and I'm very guilty of this, we're going to have to do a Brazil show with the word Brazil in it, or a Latin American show with what your thoughts are on that.
You want to do the Brazilian?
I think that was Gerardo Mosqueira that said that the identity is an obsession in Latin America. And in a sense, maybe it still is. I think that in terms of, I think historically Brazil was much more connected to Europe than to other countries in Latin America. I mean, say that Brazil always faced the ocean and gave the backs to the rest of the continent. But it has changed a lot, of course. And I think that there are some institutional initiatives like Mercosul Biennial and other projects that try to make these connections stronger. But I think that again, it's a matter of some taste in the sense that you need to have these institutionalized ideas to work with the group shows and so on. I don't think that this is a question for the artists anymore, to be a Brazilian artist, to be a Latin American artist, although paradoxically, the links are stronger between Brazil and other Latin American artists nowadays. But I don't think this is a question for them. Maybe they are foreigners, like Raimond has put before. They felt that they belong to different traditions and they negotiate between them. And of course, they're always speaking from a place. They don't speak about a place or only about things concerning a place, but they speak about a place. They speak from a point in this web that connects everything. They speak from different perspectives. A Brazilian artist or artist that lives in Brazil that has been affected by all the Brazilian history and the environment that involves he or him or she. Of course, he or she will react different to the world from an artist that lives here in London or lives in Lagos or lives in Beijing or anywhere else. So the idea, I'm more interested in discussing about the place where you speak from than about on the place, or than to speak about a place or about what identifies that place, what makes it different from other place. Denaturalize the idea of identity.
Could I just ask you to expand a little bit on something you mentioned in passing, which is that it does seem like currently there are increasing numbers of links, different types of links between Brazil and other Latin American countries. And what's your take on why that's happening? Maybe it's a kind of, why is it that at the moment there are...
the world is changing. I mean, the balance of power is changing. Yeah. Different players are coming, are rising. Brazil has a big part on that, but also Mexico, Argentina. Now in Brazil, have much more information about Latin American, other Latin American countries than before. Have just had a very good show about Peruvian art, contemporary art from Peru in São Paulo, and I've seen exhibition group shows about Colombian artists, Venezuelan artists in Brazil recently. So that's something that didn't exist before, or very, very rarely. It's becoming a sort of pattern.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, yes. I think things have changed a lot. By the way, I remember something that Sildo Morales said about being Brazilian. He said something like, when people ask me what it means to be a Brazilian, I can only think of the impossibility of not being Brazil. And it's certainly true that when we made Transcontinental, that the artists from the different countries, which was Chile, Argentina, and Brazil, on the whole, didn't know one another. For example, Tunga didn't know Eugenio Ditborn. And the only person, curiously enough, the only person who seemed to know everybody was Victor Grippo, of Argentinian artist, who one thinks of as a kind of recluse. but he somehow managed to know everybody.
I'd like to say that maybe a lot of this construction has happened from the outside and from us, no? That the discovery I've done, for example, of Latin America happened in London, no? And it was here that I met others whom I suddenly found that I shared a common ground, a common ground in language. I mean, really, Portuguese and Spanish are the same language, just with different intonations that were separated with like centuries, But now that we're finding each other again. We know it's the same language, It's just a different intonation. Portuñol is the language of the future, and it is here. It's in New York. It's in the centers where, or through shows like this ones, where you acquire the notion of the other, And you're not in a way like, I mean, normally if you're an artist in Mexico, you're an artist in Colombia. I mean, you're looking towards New York, or you're looking towards London. That's where you want to be, But suddenly, when you get there, or you go to exhibitions like this, is when the artist discovers that there's others with whom he shares a common language, and not only a common language, but a common history, Yeah. That we all had like repressive governments. We all had a common history of economic crises that happened one after another. We share today the same kind of positions between centers and peripheries and semi-peripheries in relation to, for example, art centers, or in relation to economy, or in relation to. So there's a common ground that is not identity as being Brazilian or being Mexican, but there's a common ground of context, of histories, of which go beyond those other forms of representation. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that this is kind of exactly what a lot of the context of discussions that took place between different art critics in the 70s was the same. It was like a process of trying to work, okay, there is this common ground, what is it? And it was quite an open question. And I think that sense of knowing that there is something that's forming those relationships, and the a large amount of the key to it is language. And obviously, language also has a huge effect on how limited often the knowledge about Latin American art or Brazilian art in the English language is because we're a little bit lazy in this country, to be honest, in terms of translating and speaking.
No,
I think
also you would say the same. There's not a circulation of knowledge within the country. It's very recent.
Yeah, I think it's happening now. It's happening in quite a strategic way now.
And a plane to go from Mexico to Sao Paulo costs the same as to come from Mexico to Europe. And there's a series of barriers and barriers that are still there. And I think what I was talking about this practice is that this idea of also erasing these other kind of frontiers and barriers. The barriers imposed by governments, and the ridiculous idea of a unified America.
But isn't there another context where it's got a cachet to be different than others, and that got some cachet to it?
I've heard artists saying that. Yeah, it can be used. I mean, in the way that when you are an artist or any other kind of self-employed professional, sometimes you play one card and sometimes you play another, and it depends who you're doing it for, I guess. Yeah, I think it's a strategic thing, maybe.
You might have something very different to offer that, for instance, European contemporary art now is quite cold and cerebral, and maybe South American or.
Would you mind saying your question again with the mic, just because? I'm
just saying that that you have a different take and a different view on life. So sort of European art it was very Pacific, and one contemporary art now is quite sort of cold, isn't it? And South American way of thinking it may have a different view to give another way to give to the art world.
Yes and no, because I think we would be playing the dichotomies of hot and cold, good and bad, tropical and So there's a danger, but yeah, as you say, there's a cachet, you know, and there's always been a danger of the artist kind of auto-exoticizing himself when it's convenient, or doing a certain kind of work because he knows that's what is expected for him outside, you know. So.
I mean, I can remember that back in the 60s, I mean, the view we took of, for example, Brazil and Venezuela, was that they were at the leading edge of modernity. Architecture was considered absolutely brilliant. Britain was totally old-fashioned compared with, and so on.
I think that continues to be true, and in terms of obviously Brazil's economic position, but also its history, its learning from being through certain moments, has generated a certain type of intelligence, which we do not possess. We have to finish, though. Sorry, this could go on, and maybe we can save some of this thinking, you know, for when we have a chance for more questions later. But I'm aware that we've run slightly over, started slightly late. So, yeah, thank you very much, my esteemed company.